we'll get started with the next session. My name is Tom Eblen, and I'm a columnist of the Lexington Herald-Leader, and I'm going to be moderating this next session. And first, I know what Janie Polk is thinking. Where are the women on this stage? Well, I can't help you there. This is what we have. But we've got a really nice panel of people leaders from San Antonio and leaders from Lexington who are going to talk about some of the things we've seen and, more importantly, how they accomplished it. Because, you know, as Judge Wolf was just telling us, you know, you have to have good planning, but you also have to have strong leadership. And as a lot of people know, you have to have good systems, you have to have good management practices and processes. So we're going to talk a little about this, and we're going to have a conversation first with our panelists among each other, and then later some questions from the audience that they can address. First of all, I want to introduce, on our far left is Jim Clark, the president of LexArts. Kind of his counterpart in San Antonio is Felix Padron, who is the director of the City of San Antonio's Office of Cultural Affairs. We have Lexington Mayor Jim Gray, and at the table with him is Darryl Bird, who is the CEO of SA 2020, their long-term planning process. This table we have Ben Brewer, who is the president of Centro San Antonio, and with him is Jeff Fugate, who is president of the Lexington Downtown Development Authority. And first of all, I would like to have, do you want to do the slides first, or we're going to have them enter? Okay. We've got some slides up here. One is showing San Antonio and the Riverwalk. This is part of what you saw and rode down the boat yesterday. And then along the Riverwalk, you see they have developed, or it kind of follows a number of attractions, some of which you probably saw from the boat. With that, you have a lot of shopping, things like the River Center Mall that we passed under, and then other things. And then dining opportunities, some of which you may have enjoyed last night. So the Riverwalk has become kind of a thread that connects a lot of San Antonio, especially a lot of the part that the visitors see. Well, if you kind of, you know, take that scale, you know, San Antonio is a city 4 times the size of Lexington, but the downtown central area is not really that much bigger. You look at that scale and kind of superimpose some of the things that we've been talking about in Lexington as part of the Arena Arts and Entertainment District process. Town Branch Creek, which is now underground, but one of the things that came out of that was creating some type of a commons area if you were able to bring some of that water back up. And so this kind of gives you a little bit of a visual representation of where that common would be and where some of our existing amenities and attractions are in Lexington. So just to kind of help put some of that in perspective of what you saw yesterday and what you'll see more of today on maybe some of the tours. So first of all, I'd like, that kind of help frame our conversation. I'd like to have our panelists just kind of introduce themselves and tell a little about what they do, and then we'll begin the discussion. Jim, if you want to start there.
LexArts is Lexington's United Arts Fund and Arts Council. We're a private nonprofit group, which is very different from the city agency that Felix represents, but we in fact do many of the same things that they're working on in terms of cultural development and working with building a stronger arts environment, and how that ties into economic development and growth is a very important thing, but I think that's where San Antonio really has that well defined, and I think we can learn a lot from that. Their planning process, they have a 10-year cultural plan, which Felix will talk about. So I think there's some strategies that they've employed here to integrate the arts fully into the development of the city that we could learn from. And also, San Antonio has a very developed public art program. We're just beginning to get a public art program going. We'll be installing a new piece at the end of June on top of the Downtown Art Center. But also, in reference to yesterday's presentation by Lori Houston, she mentioned that San Antonio was very proud to have a piece by the sound artist Bill Fontana. Well, we have one too. It is located between the Fifth Third Tower and the parking garage at the breezeway connecting Main Street and Vine Street. And Bill has created a live real-time transmission of the sound of the town branch that's running underneath Vine Street and bringing it to the surface. So we have a very similar thing of investing in artists this way to highlight those things that are unique and authentic to our city. Felix.
Thank you, Jim. As Jim indicated, the Office of Cultural Affairs is part of city government. It is a department of the city of San Antonio. It's been around a little bit over 20 years, and it really came about as a result of back then Mayor Henry Cisneros having the vision to really begin looking at the arts as a very sort of serious way, and then obviously established an ad hoc committee to look and study how that could be done. And then obviously 2 years later, in the early 80s, it was established. It is a fairly, compared to other city departments, it is a fairly small department. We have 18 very capable staff individuals managing 3 key programs. The largest one, which is the Arts Funding Program. The second one is the implementation of the formation, the Cultural Collaborative, which is the city's first ever adopted cultural plan back in 2005. And then obviously the Public Art Program, which actually was the program that I established and started 17 years ago when the city first brought me in. So, you know, most of our funding comes from the hotel motel tax collection. So thank you so much for contributing to that economy by staying here in the wonderful West End River Hotel. The operating budget that we currently have just for operations, including the arts funding, is $8 million, más o menos. Again, mostly from the hotel motel tax, but we're beginning to see some movement of tapping into the general fund to fund some of the activities that we currently undertake. Above and beyond that, the public art program obviously is funded by the Capital Improvement Program. We just, not long ago, we just passed a new $500 million bond, which the 1% is applicable. So moving forward, we're going to be implementing about más o menos $6 million in public art just out of the bond, but obviously there are other projects that are coming down the pike, like the expansion of the convention center, which is going to generate an additional $2 million for public art implementation in the convention center alone. So I'll leave it at that, and then I'll just open it up for more questions and presentations.
Thanks, Ben. I'm not going to wear y'all out with my thoughts quite yet, but I am going to introduce my colleague up here, Darryl. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about himself, but in the short time I've been with him, I've found out that he came from a very successful career in the private sector into the public sector and is leading imaginatively and creatively and inspiringly on their 2020 project.
Thank you, Mayor Gray. Good morning. Bienvenido. Welcome to San Antonio. Well, this panel is about transformation, and so I'm happy to be here with you to talk about another transformation the city of San Antonio is going through, moving into the next decade. So I'm Darryl Bird. I'm the CEO of SA 2020, and that is our 10-year process to transform ourselves yet again, to take another great leap into the next decade. About a year and a half ago, our mayor, who hopefully some of you have met or will get the opportunity to meet not long after he came into office, realized it was time for us to look to the future as a community. It was time for us to come together and plan and do. And it had not been done since Target 90, and you heard Judge Wolf speak about Target 90. That was in the mid-'80s. Planning for the 1990s. So that was the last time really comprehensively as a community San Antonians had come together. So the mayor asked a few of us, myself, Graham Weston, who's chairman of Rack Space Hosting, and the judge alluded to that company. That's the probably, if not one of the largest cloud computing companies in the world, certainly a leader in that industry, and homegrown here in San Antonio. Asked that chairman, myself, and a wonderful attorney, Sonia Rodriguez, in town to help him think about what that process was going to look like moving San Antonio into the future. And the first thing that Mayor Castro stuck his spear in the ground and said, we're not going to move away from this, is that this would be a ground-up process. And for those of you that have planning backgrounds or have been involved in community planning efforts, you know that oftentimes comprehensive community-wide planning efforts don't always start there. Sometimes the public, depending upon how cynical you are, get invited into the process, but it doesn't always start there. Oftentimes it's a group that we lovingly refer to as the usual suspects. There are people like you and me in the room, elected and appointed officials, business leaders, civic leaders, who sometimes always have coming from the best place in their heart and in their mind and their love for their city, already have some idea on where things need to go. And then, again, depending upon how cynical you are, the public gets invited in for either true participation, true ownership, or endorsement, rubber stamping. Well, the mayor here wanted to ensure that that was never a question. So we all agreed and began a process called SA 2020, and it was unprecedented in its scope and in the amount of ownership that we had among San Antonians themselves. You know, we began on a beautiful Saturday morning in September of 2010. The consultant that we had hired out of Florida, who had asked us that we had hired to help us with this process, had done this all over North and South America to great effect, and they knew what they were doing. And they suggested to us that as we look to the future in San Antonio, if we had 400 people show up, engaged, passionate, active, participating, that would be a true sign of success and that we should move forward. Well, we had about 1,200 people show up that Saturday morning at SA 2020. The participation never waned over a 6-month process. We never had less than 700-800 people in the room. Always had a couple hundred people participating virtually. Those were San Antonians who were probably studying abroad or working abroad that wanted to have a say in the future of their city. So we always had great ownership. And it was geographically, we had great participation as well. You look at the amount of people who participated. They were represented across about 118 individual zip codes all across the city of San Antonio. 118 zip codes, and no one of those 118 zip codes had more than 5.5% representation. So the whole city participated in this process. So when we got together, what were we talking about? The main question the mayor asked of San Antonio was, what type of city do we want to be? What do we want to look and feel like in the year 2020? That seems like a really simple question, but it had a lot of depth to it. It was deep. And it wasn't what type of a city do we want to be based on the relative underemployment or the relative undereducation or the political challenges that we deal with as a community day to day. It wasn't what type of a city do we want to be based on all of the roadblocks that are in front of us day to day, or what type of a city do we think the world is going to let us have. The question, and it took us a while to really get people thinking this way, San Antonians thinking this way, was when you close your eyes and you meditate for one moment and you move away all of the things that frustrate you day to day or the things that you have to deal with in the routine of your lives, and you think about what is most important to you. When you think about your child, you think about your grandchild, you think about if you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 company here, and you think about the company that has been entrusted to you to grow here. You've got employees who call San Antonio their home. You're a young entrepreneur. You've got a groundbreaking idea that may change the world. When you think about those things, your business, your family, your community, the things that are most important to you, what conditions need to exist in this city moving into the next decade that will create the most fertile ground for that to flourish? That was the heart and the essence of the question. And San Antonio's finally got that. It was not what do we think we can do, not what do we think is available to us today. What do we want moving into the next decade? And that created a very, very powerful conversation among those thousands and thousands of San Antonians that participated. Out of that came 11 core focus areas that have vision statements attached to them. And they range from downtown development to education, which was probably the most had the most energy around it was transforming education. Arts and culture was a big one for SA 2020, transportation, neighborhoods, health and fitness. And I'm going to give you a couple quick examples on how bold San Antonians were thinking, and then we can talk later as I turn it over to the other panelists, but just give you a couple of examples of how bold San Antonians were thinking about the next decade. So the health and fitness vision was that in the year 2020, San Antonians will be among the healthiest in all of America. This is not a city today that is known for being as healthy as we should be. I think you all probably know that. Few cities in America are. But San Antonians said by the year 2020, we will be among the healthiest in America. In education, the vision was that in the year 2020, San Antonio will orchestrate one of the greatest turnarounds in education in all of America. One of the greatest turnarounds in education in all of America. In arts and culture, the vision was that in the year 2020, San Antonio will lead the world as a creative community. And the vision wasn't that we were going to lead South Texas as a creative community or lead Texas or even lead the U.S. It was lead the world as a creative community. So those are just a few examples of the boldness by which San Antonians were thinking about the future of their children, the future of their business, the future of their communities. And our work now through SA 2020 and our partners in this city is to turn that vision into reality through action. And that's going to be based on a concept I'll hopefully get to share with you later, which is turning San Antonians themselves into investors and shareholders in the future of their city. Not passive citizens who give a vision to the usual suspects and hope that that shows up, but San Antonians who get in the game themselves, call their own number, get in the games, and work alongside the Judge Wolfs of the world and the Mayor Grays of the world and the civic leaders like you and business leaders like you in the world, and invest themselves as investors in the future of their city, because when you're an investor, you expect a return according to what's most important to you. So, thank you.
Thank you, Darryl. Ben, tell us about Centro.
Thank you. I'm Ben Brewer, president of Downtown Alliance, and I'm going to show you a couple of diagrams here. An organization that we call today the Centro Collaborative, and it's really 4 nonprofits that are organized for different purposes. The bullets are a little bit hard for you to read, but I'll enumerate those for you in just a moment. But the key is that it's all under one administration, one staff that is administering these 4 nonprofits, and it's all about urban revitalization. And as Darryl mentioned, in the SA 2020 process, downtown development, downtown's revitalization was one of the key focuses that came out of that process. And that's something that we've been at for a number of years. And it really started with this organization, the Downtown Alliance, which is our membership organization. We've got about 500 members, mainly property owners, business owners in the downtown area. The organization really serves in an advocacy role. Looking at policy issues, development issues, planning issues that could impact or shape those businesses and how downtown develops. About 15 years ago, we started the process to create a public improvement district. And you may have seen some of our amigos on the streets. Those are the folks in the gold shirts and khaki pants that are helping pick up trash and help you with instructions or information about downtown. This organization, the property owners within that boundary, which is typical of a public improvement district, pay an annual assessment like an ad valorem tax that raises about $2 million a year that pays for these unique services within this boundary. And this has been transformational as far as the ambiance and cleanliness of the downtown core. And you can see that it encompasses the most developed portion of the Riverwalk there in that, in that map. We then, about a year and a half ago, created the Centro Partnership, and that was, its real purpose, again, was really focused more on what the SA 2020 process is about, is really looking at where we want to go in the future, and really looking at planning and kinds of development issues, and getting public and private sector folks on the same page. And that was really key, because typically it was often you'd find a sort of an adversarial kind of a relationship between, say, development happening in the downtown area and what the politicians thought, or some of the other kinds of leadership. Well, this brought some of this core leadership together, both public and private sector, on a board, sharing this common vision. And it's the Centro partnership that will really, that component of our central organization that will really work very closely on the kinds of development that we want to see in the downtown, in the center city core. And we're really broadening our horizons some to not deal with just the core, but particularly into those neighborhoods that begin to surround the downtown core, because it is like a heart with arteries, and making sure that those arteries that that pump the blood in and out are healthy and serving those neighborhoods. And if they are, they're serving downtown well, they're serving the urban core well as the neighborhood. So let me go back to this diagram here. And the basically the Alliance, as I mentioned, is really about education. We put on a lot of programs that talk about, illustrate to our members and others about what some of the possibilities are. We've had programs about streetcar, and we've had programs about healthcare, and we've had programs about the arts, any number of kinds of components that are really integral to a healthy downtown core. It is the membership organization, so there is a constituency there that we serve and work on behalf of. The Centro partnership, as I mentioned, is really about vision and policy, looking ahead, looking out where we want to go. So it's keenly interested in all aspects of both what we've got on the ground today and what we want to see on the ground in the future. The orange box there is the public improvement district, and it's all about public space management. It is the amigos out there that are cleaning the streets, helping folks with directions. We have an extensive landscaping program, planters, things like that on the light poles to really help soften up the urban core, and that's both at street and Riverwalk level. The other is the Development Corporation. That's somewhat like your development corporation, though not as active today, but it's been really, it's there as a tool. It's a C3, a 501c3, so it's there to receive grants or charitable contributions. And it's project specific, and it will jump in and support the other three organizations when there is a project that is appropriate and something that it may be an enhancement of something that we've already got in place, or something that we want to do at some point in the future. So key to this really, though, is that it's all administered by one lean and mean little nonprofit staff. We've got 4 boards of directors, so a lot of folks involved, and a lot of, and we work very closely with some of the other downtown organizations in our chambers, and very much a collaborative effort. So with that, I'll leave you with a little, just a bit about our organization. We'll be glad to answer any additional questions.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Ben. Hi, I'm Jeff Fugate, president of the Lexington Downtown Development Authority, and we're the downtown group that's probably a little lesser known because we do not put on Thursday Night Live. That's Renee and DLC. We were created as part of the city-county government about a little over a decade ago as an economic development agency, and we were basically designed to promote and encourage investment downtown. So practically what that means is that we sort of work in 3 areas. We do the recruitment and assistance for private investors and private developers. So running interference, being a liaison, packaging deals, RFPs, et cetera, and working with the city closely to bring the city resources to bear on that. Project management for public investment, the most sort of visible one was the streetscape improvements in the last decade. And then we're also an advocate and thought leader on issues around good urban development, both as it relates to downtown, but the reason we care about downtown is because it impacts the rest of the city. And so it's about having a whole vision for the city, working closely with our planning department to make sure that we're all working towards the same goals. And I came on at the beginning of the calendar year, so I'm right at 6 months at this. And when I came in, one of the things that was immediately obvious is that Lexington has a lot of vision. There's been, it started with, well, it started way back. Actually, there's a railroad the mayor likes to reference. But if we look at the urban service boundary and starting there, and most recently reinforced by the vision of the RUP district and the master plan that came with that, which is about much more than just an arena and a convention center, and also the ongoing rework of the comp plan, the vision is there, and transformation, which is what we're up here to talk about today, begins with vision, but doesn't end there. And it actually, the meat of it's really implementation. And I think that's a real key for moving forward, and what I'm looking forward to learning from this panel.
All right. Well, thanks very much. I guess maybe the best way to start would be to get Darryl and Ben to talk a little about how do you take that big vision that Darryl described and kind of bring it down into the practical aspects of how do we accomplish this? How do we get it done?
Ben, you can plug in when I miss something. Well, can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, with SA 2020, one of the key components to the process was not just to talk about the vision. That was the first part, really to divorce ourselves as a community from the things that keep us thinking small. It wasn't worth going through an exercise like we went through to be thinking small, so it was time for leap. So that was the first thing, to divorce ourselves of that, think big, think about what's, again, and this is a key theme, what's really important to you and what you really, really want. Not what you think you can get, but what you really, really want. That's key, because you've got to start there as a community and get some sort of consensus around that. Once you figure that out, which we did across all those 11 areas with vision statements, which really total up to San Antonio truly taking its place without any dispute among the nation's great cities. Then you have to figure out, okay, what does it look like when we get there? How do we what are the measurements that we use? What are the indicators that suggest to us that we're making progress? What tells us that we are standing still? What tells us that we're moving backwards or not having any impact at all? So throughout the process, and this was all driven from the public, each of those 11 areas has core indicators that leading indicators and supporting indicators that suggest to us that we've been successful. And I'll give you an example. In education, in the area of education, the vision again was that San Antonio would orchestrate one of the greatest turnarounds in education in America. What does that look like? It relates to high school graduation rates. It relates to college attainment, college preparedness, third grade reading levels, kinder readiness. Those are an example of the indicators, the measures and metrics that we incorporated to make sure we measure ourselves. And those things are going to be reported out on an annual basis, maybe even more frequently through this is, I think, maybe a little bit of an innovation, at least in San Antonio, which is actually reporting out on our success. Basically, it's ROI in many respects. If San Antonians are investors in that future, we've got specific measures of success. We've got to report what the return on that investment of the San Antonians, from the political leadership, business community leadership to individuals, has been. So, for example, the third grade reading, the measure is that by the year 2020, 85% of all third graders, by the time they finish that grade, will be reading at a high level. And that's an important one because for those of you that are in education, you know that if a child can't read well at a pretty high level by the time they complete the third grade, that there's almost no catching up for the rest of their academic career. So the options that would normally be available to a child to tackle the world and really live a full life are limited right at that point if they can't read. Well, today San Antonians that fall into the category of being able to read at a high level by the end of the third grade is about 45%. So that's, again, kind of gives you a sense of the gulf between where we are today, just in that one area, and that ultimate vision of transforming education. So we measure those things on an annual basis. How are we doing in third grade reading levels? How are we doing in kinder readiness? The same thing with health and fitness. How are we doing in terms of the prevalence of diabetes, overall health and wellness? How are we doing with juvenile and adult obesity? Economic competitiveness is another vision. San Antonians want to lead the world through business innovation in 21st century industries, and those include IT, IT security, aerospace, biosciences, healthcare, and green energy jobs. There are specific measures and metrics that we have to track every single year to see how those things are happening. So a couple of ways that you start to get at it in terms of actually implementing it. One is, and I always begin here, which is making sure that the most abundant resource that you have, the most abundant fuel to bring to the fire, San Antonians themselves are serious about getting there, that they appreciate what it looks like for San Antonio's sake in the year 2020 to have all those things happen. It's personally relevant to them. They see what it means to their businesses, to their families, their communities. It's not abstract for them. And then they can be a very powerful support when it's time for your civic leaders, when it's time for your elected and appointed officials to move big projects forward. If the community doesn't see the value in it, you're going to have a tough road to hoe, particularly when it comes to doing major projects like half a billion dollar bond programs that San Antonio just passed, all supported out of SA 2020. And we just passed, I think it was just over almost $600 million in bonds in San Antonio about a month ago through an overwhelming public vote. Every single one of those projects had to meet an SA 2020 test, meaning every single one of those projects, from streets and drainage, supporting the SA 2020 goals, from parks, from arts, all of them. Transportation had to be consistent with what the community had already said through SA 2020 were priorities. And that wouldn't have happened if the community hadn't taken ownership in the very early stages of SA 2020. So it's the public themselves taking ownership of it and then supporting major public initiatives to get it done. And the politicians and the business community leaders can lean on that when it's time for them to do big things. And it also has to filter through organizations themselves. The city of San Antonio, for example, has begun to take the SA 2020 objectives that are most relevant to it as an organization. And this is a $2 billion corporation, essentially. It's filtering its way down through the goals and objective setting process in that organization, in that city. So for almost every city department, probably within the next year or so, they'll have goals that are specifically related to SA 2020. So when they set their implementation goals, Felix has already done this. He's ahead of the game. But for every major city department, they will, when they are measuring their performance, when the city manager holds them accountable for things, there are components of that are specifically connected and related to driving the SA 2020 process forward. And then that's all supported on the back end by that ROI reporting mechanism. We've hired the State Data Center, which is the state demographer's office, to create that for us. So in each of those 11 areas, on all of those leading and supporting indicators, there's a return report that is available to the entire public, to all investors, whether you're Joe San Antonio or the CEO of one of our Fortune 500 companies, that suggests to you how we're doing in those areas. The city manager has access to that, and it will look very akin to what you would see in any other financial investment that you would make in your business or your personal lives. So it's just filtering it down through the organizations themselves. And then the last piece I'll talk about in terms of the implementation, Ben, you may want to add, goes again back to San Antonians themselves. You know, if you think about, it's easy to look at the investments that a mayor and a city council and a city government can make in the future of your city. And it's very interesting to look at major investments that say a big corporation can make, or big public agencies can make in the future of your city, transportation, public infrastructure, all those things. But you've got again, an abundant and very potent resource available to you to drive things forward in Lexington, and those are Lexingtonians. Is that right? Good. First try. Lexingtonians. Lexingtonians themselves, and that's what we've done in San Antonio. Again, you create an ownership proposition for the folks in the community, They've come up with the plan. It's important to them. They've got a demand for it because they know what it means to their businesses, to their families, to the things they care most about. You think about how much volunteerism you have in your community on a day-to-day basis. It's probably enormous. There's a lot of energy there. So one of the ideas to get to where we want to go with SA 2020 is to focus that energy much more than it typically is. And I'll use two quick examples. One is if you have say a CEO of a Fortune 500 company or a big company in your town, and they're generous as a corporation in terms of the dollars, the checks that they write back into Lexington at large, and they're very generous in terms of the volunteerism, which is probably a multiple of the checks that they write in terms of value, people that work for that company that are volunteering themselves in various areas across that company. The chairman of the board or a major shareholder could come to the CEO of that company and say, gosh, I know I asked you last year what was the return on investment on the $5 million that we as a company invested back into Lexington philanthropically. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. I know you could tell me the return on investment on the $5 million we invested in a capital equipment purchase. You could tell me what benefit that provided back. But when I asked you what was the benefit of the same $5 million that we invested in Lexington last year, your answer was maybe a little bit more ambiguous. It was maybe increased our brand or we were being a good corporate citizen, or it was just something we're supposed to do. What if that CEO had gone to his leadership group, his board, his employees, which is the most important resource that he has, and said, we've been doing a lot of things in Lexington, and we've been putting a lot of money into the community. We've been volunteering ourselves like crazy. We love this community, but we're not seeing the return. We're not having the impact that we could. Why don't we think about what is most important to us as a company? Think about our corporate values, who we are as an organization. Think about the future, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and have a serious conversation about what's most important to us, what needs to show up, what conditions need to exist in Lexington for our company to never have to have a conversation about, is Lexington the best place for us to have our home as a company? What needs to exist for Lexington to always show up as the best place in all the United States of America for us to have our corporate home here? And then invest ourselves as a community in that area in a very, very focused way, and maybe not be so spread so thin. Maybe that's education. Maybe you've got workforce issues. Maybe you've got an aging population. You got boomers that are working for you that are retiring, and you need new talent, the fuel that is going to drive your business forward. Maybe it's education. So think about the things that are most important to you and drive those forward. The same thing can happen in households. Instead of us spreading ourselves thin when the doorbell rings, or work, or through colleagues, and investing ourselves all over the place. Maybe education is what's most important in the Bird household. Maybe it's health and fitness in another household, and invest yourselves in a very focused way to get there and track that return.
Well, thank you, Darryl. Ben, could you tell us a little bit about how this big kind of strategic framework kind of guides Centro, not only kind of in the big picture, but kind of in the day-to-day of how you get stuff done?
Sure. Well, Darryl mentioned that downtown development was one of those 11 focus areas in SA 2020, and the mayor charged the Centro organization with taking the lead on really mapping where that future was going to go. SA 2020, the initial process was the Dream It, and it's for all of their partners, and they've identified lead partners in all of these different focus areas to provide the map it phase, and then to report back on the kinds of results that we want to see. So SA 2020, the plan was released March a year ago. Less than a month later, we initiated a process to relook at our strategic direction for the Center City. And we, over the summer, developed a strategic plan for the Center City, and working with a good consultant group that, and again, we had our own set of public meetings. They were very, very well attended, and they did much the same kind of exercise. How do you want to see this Center City grow? Where do you want to see residential? Where do you want to see shopping? Where do you want to see, transportation corridors? And out of that grew a plan and a direction that is physically embodied in a document that will serve as our guiding document at least through 2020. There's some very key metrics that we're looking at, and in particular, the number of residential units that we're seeing built in the urban core. Also the job growth. We want to see a 25% increase, minimum 25% increase in the number of jobs that are in the downtown area, in the center city. And so the plan is all about that and provides a framework for where we want to see that development occur. Coupled with that, the city is looking at how they incentivize some of those kinds of things to happen. Because today, to build some of that housing, with the rents that can be charged, in particular for apartments, there's a gap. There's a gap in what kind of revenues can be achieved with what it costs to build, the cost of the land, the cost of the development itself. On average, it's anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000 an actual unit. And the developers have all experienced that, those housing developers that are out there putting those projects together. And so the city is looking for ways that they can kind of really help get that snowball rolling downhill on its own, to get it to where the market really catches up really to the cost of that development. And so we're in the process right now, or the city is, of formalizing an incentive program that specifically incentivizes residential development in the urban core in these targeted areas that the plan identified. And so if you're coming in and you've got a project and you're going to take this land and put 250 apartments on it, the city, depending on where it's located, will be able to provide you with the kinds of incentives to help cover that gap, to fill that gap. Everything from tax abatements to fee waivers to actual outright grants or loans that can be paid back in lieu of the taxes that you would be paid. So they give you that money up front and then you pay it back over time. Everything from tax increment reinvestment zone financing to help you do some of the public infrastructure around that project. The city realizes that if that one kind of development, if we focus on that one type of development, it's really going to float so many of the boats. It's going to cause that tide to rise everywhere, creating the demand for residential, creating the, for retail, creating the demand for office space, because folks want to office and live in close proximity. It puts more eyes and ears on the streets. That creates a safer environment for the urban core. And really key in this kind of creative economy is it's where the millennials want to live. I'm raising 4 of them. I know well what they want. They want urban over suburban. They want communities that are committed to sustainability, communities that have good transportation options, communities that have lots of job options, because unlike many of us that might have 2 or 3 jobs in our life, they'll have 20. So they're flexible, they move a lot, they like to live here and then live there. There's a fabulous author, management consultant, Rebecca Ryan, who I hope you all will hear from someday if you haven't heard from her. She studied hundreds of thousands of these folks and has pretty good data on what they want. And so it's really a science in itself. But so back to really sort of moving the needle. We're measuring those kinds of results. We're their lead partner. We're going to measure and tell them how many residential units we're developing, how this is beginning to impact the crime statistics and lower any kind of criminal statistics in the urban core. What kind of job growth will be taking place on a year in, year out basis? How many of these folks are literally moving into our urban core? And we're also beginning to involve many of those young folks on our boards and in our organizations to make sure that we're grooming those leaders of the future, because like it or not, they're there. They're our children. They're our leaders of the future, and they're going to be leading our companies and our growth and our development of our cities, whether it's Lexington or San Antonio, in the very near future.
Yeah. You know, one important thing about that kind of where people choose to want to live and work is culture and the arts. And I'm curious, Jim, what do you want to know about San Antonio's, from Felix, about some of San Antonio's big arts initiatives and the way they make arts happen?
Well, first off, we already had Miss Ryan, what was that, 2 years ago or 3
Yeah,
years ago
in
when
Madison,
she spoke
yeah.
to us, and that really points to the whole creative economy, and that's where this city agency that Felix heads up is totally integrated into that planning process and economic development. They are charged with leading the effort to move the creative economy forward, and I think that's what we need to figure out is that integration and how it all works together. And you all have seen this, that since the 1920s, San Antonio has been investing in good design of its infrastructure, and the Riverwalk, those bridges, the railings, the sidewalks themselves are created by architects, engineers, designers. So they made that investment and created a culture of wanting better design. And that's been carried through. And also we saw that in Greenville, where they were investing in a performing arts center 5-6 blocks outside of the area that was already developed, because they knew that that would draw businesses down toward the new performing arts center, and it worked. And their investment in the governor's school has worked and paid off in the downtown area in Greenville. So we're seeing how cultural infrastructure can guide business and guide other development toward it, just like the investment in the public infrastructure of the Riverwalk. But I think also the arts, as usual, has sort of led the way in this, that it becomes a very, it's the calling card that people see. It's a very visible thing, but there's so much behind that in terms of employees and making a living wage for these artists. And so that's what I wanted Felix to talk about, is that whole, the creative economy, how that works, and how you're responsible for delivering that.
Well, let me just say that 15 years ago, that wasn't the case here in San Antonio, where the arts were really valued as an economic asset. I think it was, you have to sort of start with understanding your own context. And the context of San Antonio, if you don't know, you may know, is that you have a city that is basically 300 years in the making. It's one of the oldest cities in the country. It is a city that that has one of the oldest symphonies in the country, started in the early 20s and still, knock on wood, still playing. It was a city that was the epicenter of silent filmmaking in the country, again, in the early 20s, and then evolved to the 30s and 40s, where we were recognized, San Antonio was recognized as the cultural center of Texas. Then, it went through this sort of period where I think, and this is my own theory and conversations that I have with my colleagues, because of that strong sort of heritage and cultural sense that San Antonio was founded on and built on, we kind of took arts and culture, I think, for granted, meaning that it was so built into our DNA that for the most part we forgot to think about that, in order to nurture and evolve arts and culture, guess what? You have to invest in it. You really have to continue to invest to maintain that level of activity and mobility. Also, the idea that San Antonio has these deeply ingrained cultural traditions, it was kind of difficult to sort of balance the old and the new. How do you maintain that sense of authenticity, of uniqueness, but continue to build on innovation and new business practices without taking away the uniqueness of San Antonio? So San Antonio in the early 90s was just coming out of a period that really did not didn't have the political support for the arts. We were still pretty much of the school that the arts maybe should not be part of government funding. It was going through, I would imagine also as many other cities, it was coming out of what we called a cultural wars, where government was really not investing in its arts and infrastructure. But we knew that for us, it was a no-brainer. The infrastructure was there, the DNA was there, and the world was moving fast. New companies were being formed here in San Antonio, companies like Rackspace, which is a world-leading cloud and web hosting company. And we began to see from them and hear from them that there was a great need to build a city that really responded to the dynamics of the individuals that navigate that world. That is why we made a strategic decision back in 2003 to begin a conversation with the community about our future in the context of arts and culture, and where we made the decision to, like the undertaking of SA 2020, to develop a vision, to develop a strategy, a plan that would take us there. But we wanted to do a plan that was different, a plan that went beyond the core arts and cultural environment. And we did that by expanding our vocabulary, or expanding the notion that it is no longer art for art's sake, but it was art for economic development. We did that by, again, engaging or developing a plan like Darryl indicated with SA 2020. It was from the ground up. We knew that it was not going to be a plan about the city or a plan about the Office of Cultural Affairs. It was a plan that gave ownership to all the stakeholders that really believed in that vision. As a result of that, or maybe should I say that it was a long process getting there. It took us 2 years to plan this thing. We engaged over 1,000 community leaders and artists and arts groups in the conversation in various ways, whether it was in group settings or one-on-one interviews or one-on-one conversations or group conversations. But we also knew that we needed to move away from San Antonio having a conversation with itself, which has sort of been the historical pattern of San Antonio. So we felt very strongly that we needed to give San Antonio access to ideas of what was going on, not only nationally, but globally. So part of the strategies was, which obviously many cities do, but we did it in a very calculated way, to bring dynamic thinkers and leaders to sort of shape that conversation. Many of you probably know of the rock and roller Richard Florida, who is the guru of economic theories. We actually opened up the Cultural Collaborative first community session with him giving a presentation to the community. And if you read his book, The Rise of the Creative Class, he basically, in a nutshell, says if cities do not invest in its creative people, you will not succeed in today's economy. So that resonated with us. We brought other folks like Daniel Pink. Actually, Daniel Pink, we brought already twice to talk to our communities and some others. But to give access to San Antonio, to open up our minds and so on. So that resulted in a document that, and I think we were the first city in the country from a cultural planning perspective to include a chapter, if you will, or a guiding principle of economic development along 5 other chapters, which are included obviously access, authenticity, economic development, education, so on and so forth, backed up by 38 very practical, very focused strategies. Also very important was the fact that we made another conscious decision to start framing the arts in a sort of industry framework, and that's why we decided to start developing internally economic impact studies for the city that did 2 things. First, it captured the entire creative industry that went beyond the traditional nonprofit sector. We started measuring the nonprofits. We started measuring the other sectors such as publishing, graphic design, art teachers, the teachers at our educational systems, and that really was an incredible transformation tool for us politically when we were selling and trying to convince our city leaders to adopt as a policy the implementation of the Cultural Collaborative, which they did in 2005. Not only that, but to make a financial commitment to the implementation of the document. The document also identified the partners that were responsible for each of the strategies to be implemented, and that worked out well. To an end, we have been successful in implementing 88% of all the strategies in that document, and $3.5 million later of investment. Some of the results have been quite phenomenal from my opinion, and I think the opinion of the leaders. It is no surprise that we're building a new performing arts center, especially in today's economic times. That's a direct result of the Cultural Collaborative, where we made the investment of developing the sort of the case study and the business plan for building the Performing Arts Center. We were able to also invest in the public art master plan, a very implementable, practical master plan for the Riverwalk. And many of you, I don't know if you have taken the time to take the tour, if you're going to take the tour. We have invested in partnership with the San Antonio River Foundation to implement some really breathtaking public art projects along the river. We also adopted the first ever public art plan for the entire city, sort of layering the Riverwalk, and as a result of that, the voters just voted to implement the $6 million that I talked about earlier. We have made significant progress in providing training to our local professional artists. We have graduated more or less about 100 professional artists, training them and developing their own business models or the business plans, which has been for us on a very, it's been a very emotional program. I will tell you, at every training session or workshop that we have done for the past 5 years, the graduating class, they walk out of that class, most of them crying. They would say, I have learned more in 4 days than all the 4 years of my graduate, or 5 years of graduate school at a university, which I think is very, really important. The other transformational investment that we've been able to make, which is becoming a trend at a national levels, and a lot of cities are putting their arms around, is the idea of developing creative clusters of how we say here, cultural corridors. These are, for us, is a very complicated system because we're not designed like other cities where you have a very high density concentrated area or cluster where those activities take place. San Antonio is not designed that way. We're pretty much spread out throughout the downtown, so we made a conscious decisions to embrace the idea that we have various clusters. So we were able to map out and start identifying what those clusters, where those clusters are located, and what we needed to do to invest to sort of make those clusters even more productive. One along Broadway, which is the sort of the corridor that embraces all of the key museums in San Antonio. And now we're beginning to see, as a result of that movement, a lot of development, not only because of the river, but also because of the Broadway corridor. And also a lot of organizations are reshifting their infrastructure to relocate to this cluster. Case in point is the Children's Museum, which is currently located in downtown. They made a conscious decision to relocate to Broadway to be alongside the other museums to create that critical mass. Southtown is a given. Southtown is an old model. Obviously is a very historical location that was just designated by the Texas Commission for the Arts as one of the, identified as one of the bona fide cultural districts in Texas, when you're going to see a lot of significant investment there. The other cluster or corridor is the west side of San Antonio, which is the sort of the core Mexican-American community. Again, putting a lot of infrastructure and defining those clusters through marketing, defining those clusters through good design, good signage, transportation, engaging artists in designing, say, for example, the bus stops in partnership with VIA that will define the identity of those destinations. So, so that's more or less in a nutshell, and I can go on and on about all the things that we've done. Marketing is a big thing for us. We've developed a marketing campaign just focusing on the arts to complement the good work that the Convention Visitors Bureau is doing. So they have taken us as a strong partner to define how the arts are marketed to not only to the locals, but to the visitors as well. So 88% completed, $3.5 million investment. The timing is perfect for us because we feel that we have sort of reached the end of that planning process, and we're so delighted now that SA 2020 now is the next stepping stone for us to get us to the next level.
All right, thank you, Felix. For the next 10 minutes, I'd like Jeff to kind of ask a question and then the mayor to ask a question to some of the points that they want to bring out, and then we'll open it up to you all to see what questions you have for the panelists. So Jeff, what's a point you'd like to know more about?
Well, so a couple of times we have heard the premise that great cities have great downtowns, and hopefully we agree. Do we agree? Yes. Okay, great. So given that premise, we've also talked about, we've heard about investment and reinvestment and targeted incentives, basically taking a strategic approach to this. And one of the things that I wanted to get Ben's thoughts on is in this sort of multi-pronged approach they're taking to managing downtown, where they've got the membership, 4 boards, 1 staff. You know, they've got the multi-pronged approach of the membership organization looking at programming and advocacy and education. They've got the strategy and the policy shop. They've got the improvement district, and then also the development corporation. In particular, I'm curious about the improvement district and what role that plays, because that's an investment in the downtown.
Well, some might consider it masochistic to have that many organizations, but that may change over time. We may see a consolidation. It's just sort of where we are today. We have, you know, I think the mantra, and you said it, is we keep beating that drum that great cities have great downtowns, and so it's all about, you know, what steps are we taking towards making our good downtown great. And that's what our planning process is all about. That's what each of the organizations are all about. That's what we ingrain in both the board members or the membership or the folks that work, say, for the Improvement District. We have made a conscious decision that the Improvement District, and you saw a map of it earlier, the Improvement District 18 months from now will be a much larger entity, and we're in the process right now of meeting with property owners in outlying areas on how to grow that boundary, how to take it from a mechanism that raises today $2 million to something that's raising $4 or $5 million, and really looking at opportunities for capital improvements and marketing and really selling the urban core, kind of taking it up to the next notch. The Improvement District alone is a great mechanism for really enjoining property owners within within a defined boundary, and making the kinds of investments that's been talked about here on the panel sort of in your own backyard, and focusing the kinds of dollars that are going to be necessary to attract businesses, to attract residents to the urban core. So it's the organizations, the different corporations, all have very distinct purposes. They all work very well together, and so far it's the model is working, each with their very specific purposes, with a really good understanding of what by each one of them what the others do, and how they can all serve as partners in achieving this this vision and ultimately the sort of physical embodiment of what we consider as great.
Okay. Mayor Gray, you have thoughts, questions?
I'm ready for, I know there's a lot of type A's in this group, so I think everybody, probably there's a bunch ready to ask a question, or at least a few. One of the things that I will say before you throw it out, Tom, is that it's always great coming on one of these trips. Going to another city, I always think of the Toyota model of continuous improvement, and that's really the fabric and the foundation of and the goals of a trip like this. One of the blessings is that we do learn so much. One of the burdens is that sometimes we hear these things that are going on somewhere else, like wonderful things in San Antonio, and there's an anxiety associated with it, because it's like, oh, goodness gracious, well, what are we doing? Are we doing any of this? And I think this allows us to then go to the next step, which is in the next day, which is to examine what we are doing, what we can improve on, and how we can recognize those initiatives that we're taking, the successes that we're having with them, and how they do compare and contrast with our host city.
Okay. All right. Well, we've got, who's got the microphones? Oh, okay. Okay, Jenna's got a microphone. Just if you've got a question, raise your hand, and she'll work her way around the room.
Testing. I'm Senator Katie Stein. I want to thank the folks who are hosting us for their wonderful hospitality. I also want to thank the Lexington Leadership Group for their hospitality toward me. I know I'm not the Stein from Lexington, I'm the Northern Kentucky Stein, but it's been a great learning experience. I hope you don't mind, I have 4 questions. The first one is, how civically engaged are your institutions of higher education? Have they been involved in your visioning process, your implementation, and your measurement process? Anybody there can answer.
I'll touch on that one, and guys can add if I miss something. But pretty involved with SA 2020. One of our lead partners in one of the 11 areas, which is government accountability and civic engagement. This is something that the community said this has got to be a priority for us moving forward. And the year 2020 was essentially about taking ownership of the future, becoming more active as a citizen, and holding your government accountable to you as well, but first you being accountable to yourself. The University of Texas at San Antonio is our lead partner in that area. So they are doing a lot of work already. They've created, coming out of the community as citizens, Bill of Responsibilities and Rights. They did that very early on through the SA 2020 process. So they've been very, very active. St. Mary's University is a partner with SA 2020. The Alamo colleges, they're basically the San Antonio's version of a community college system. It's a pretty big one. They have been leading in a very, very big way along with SA 2020, particularly to get at this issue that several folks spoke to this morning of capturing that millennial talent, attracting them to San Antonio, but also making sure that San Antonio's emerging tech sector has skilled labor. You know, that's a very challenging one. Rack space, you keep hearing about today, or in cloud computing, that's rarefied air. But today, they don't have enough young people or young at heart people coming out of our colleges, universities, and high schools that can take these $65,000 a year starting jobs just sitting there at rack space to do cloud computing. So the community colleges have been doing a really good job at connecting with the employers, with the industry sectors, tech, biosciences, aerospace, and others, making sure that they understand what the needs of that industry are instead of teaching the same old curriculum, producing students who are unprepared, and designing specific curriculums with those industry sectors, putting them in the classrooms, and then producing the talent that those industry sectors need. So the colleges and universities have been very, very active. I would say not enough though. You know, we've got over 100 and, what has it been, almost 110,000 students in San Antonio at any given time. This is from the community colleges all the way up to the four-year schools. You know, well over 100,000 students in San Antonio, and we could really turn them into a much more robust fuel or rocket fuel in San Antonio. So we need those colleges and universities to always be more active, but they've been involved.
And we have that same resource in the Lexington area as well. I'm thinking about Mayor Giuliani's turnaround of New York City and his sort of non-tolerance of broken windows, that created a perception that crime would be tolerated. What has been your focus on safe, walkable streets? And by that I mean, do you have a strong police or amigo presence to encourage that?
We do have excellent law enforcement on various levels in the urban core, and it's all about the walkability. And I'm an architect by training, and you know, people come to us and have a river that's a mile wide or 2 miles wide or whatever. And I said, but do you just have that little creek? It sounds like you all do, that runs through the core, because it's all about scale, and scale and context are so important. But we have excellent foot and bike patrols. Our San Antonio Police Department. We also have a park police department that are working along the Riverwalk and in the urban parks, and they're all a part of the same PD administration. But our uniform presence of our amigos, even though they're not armed with, just have a radio or a PDA, has really helped in the deterrence of any kind of criminal activity. So you'll see them out on the streets, and they're very visible, and they're everywhere. Now they actually go through training to be able to recognize criminal activity, so they can get on the radio and be able to call in law enforcement to actually address it. So that has been key. But we've been through several with consultant firms complete street exercises that look at our urban streets, not just for cars, but really they need to work for cars and people and bicycles and public transportation, and making sure all of those right-of-ways or where appropriate, can accommodate those different modalities of folks.
Are you a complete streets community?
We are. We're working on it, and in fact, a lot of it will be centered around the hemisphere redevelopment that's taking place right now, subject of a good portion of the bond dollars that were passed a couple of weeks ago. Two of the key surrounding streets, Alamo and Cesar Chavez, will both be recipients, are under design right now to become much more complete streets than they are today. So and we're looking at different corridors, and the bond dollars not only they're being applied in a couple of key corridors to demonstrate, what you can do over several blocks to sort of get that complete street look. And the idea is to make it pervasive and carry it throughout the urban core.
Okay, let's do one more so we have time to get around to some other questions.
Then my last question then is, do you have any urban gardening? Do you have food deserts that you're addressing? One of the things, if you want people to live in the city, they need to be able to get food easily.
We do, it's sort of on an ad hoc basis today, depending on a property owner, whether they do have an urban garden. Some of our neighborhood planning policies are looking at the allowance, because they weren't really oftentimes allowed, but now they are accommodating urban gardens. But it is something that we're actually polling a lot of our downtown constituency about, is interest in taking rooftops, in taking, say, upper decks of garages or things like that, and converting them into urban gardens. Again, it's something that's important from attracting and retaining that residential base that we're trying to grow, so folks can have that opportunity to grow their own.
Okay. Tom?
I'm Tom Martin. I'm the editor of Business Lexington, our local business publication. And my question, I've got questions for everybody, but I'll limit them right now to Felix. Touched on a couple of things that really resonate. In particular, something that I think that all of us will recognize: clusters. We've seen the rise of nodes or clusters, if you will, in Lexington in the recent years. We've always known they were there, but we've really seen this organic growth going on. I just jotted down 7 of them. Jefferson Street, Short Street, Old Vine, North Limestone to some extent, West 6th Street is beginning to come around. There's something happening on National Avenue, on South Mill. And you said that you've been identifying your clusters here, and you've been asking what needs to be invested to make these clusters more productive. And I just wondered, what are you hearing so far?
First of all, I think that don't reinvent the wheel. I think you can just build on what you have, which is the strategy that we found to be very productive and very successful here in San Antonio. I think that what we're hearing is that it works. We're hearing is that we want to make the investment, not only from a public perspective or from a private perspective. Case in point, something that has never happened to some extent in this community, where you have a corporation making a significant investment or gift to an institution to ensure that it becomes part of that cluster. And I'm making reference to HEB, which just recently donated $20 million to the Children's Museum to relocate and be part of that story. What we're hearing is, or what we're seeing, better yet, is that we're getting all the cultural institutions and developers having one conversation of how can they do it together to ensure success. And we're doing that through developing branding opportunities for each of the clusters. We're looking at how all the organizations can collaborate together to attract citizens and visitors to their destination, creating packages that benefit, again, that destination, meaning packages of how admission packages in coordination or in partnership with restaurants and tour guides and the CVB. So what really has transpired is this conversation and this collaboration spirit to ensure that they all become very successful. So it's a global conversation, it's a global partnership that is ensuring the success of these clusters.
All right, thank you. Steve's got a question, I believe, next.
I'm Steve Kay, member of Urban County Council. One of the concerns when people talk about urban development, the potential negative side is that people of low and moderate income means get forced out. I'm curious if you have any programs that address affordable housing.
Much of our housing development, I'd say in the 70s and 80s, for the most part, were affordable, either rent or age-controlled residential development projects. It's really only since about the mid-90s that we've started developing more market rate housing in the urban core. But as that has really flourished, it's beginning to have an impact on some of the neighborhoods, say the Broadway corridor. We've got a lot of residential being constructed, a lot of rental residential being constructed right now. So as the city looks at providing incentives and providing some of the funding to or waiver of fees or things like that to sort of help cover that gap, they are building in several different layers of requiring affordability. In some cases, if it's a market rate development, they'll actually ask the developer, are proposing that the developer freeze 10% of those units at sort of the initial rate, in other words, that they're charging for those units. So over time, they become more, or they as rates go up in those projects, they become sort of the affordable component of those projects. And so they're doing that, but they're also looking at their public-private partnerships where they can go in and actually provide, say, the land that some of the units might be built on, and then stipulate that the developer maintain a certain percentage of those units meeting some affordability level from a median income perspective. So it's an issue. We've got a lot of affordable units in the urban core today. It's only been in the recent, say, decade that or a little 15 years that we've started developing more market rate product. But it's becoming more of an issue, so that's something that we're starting to focus on, particularly as it relates to the incentive packages that the public sector can help with.
Okay, I think we've got time for maybe 3 more questions. Jamie first, and then Glenn, and then Robert. Get those.
First, I'd like to commend
5
San
minutes.
Antonio on how you guys, your leadership has been able to leverage the public-private partnerships. I mean, everything that we've seen, even the boat captain on the ferry ride was bragging on how well you guys have done that. So that's awesome. My question is for Jeff Fugate, and I'm going to throw you a softball because I like you. You have a captive audience of 185 of Lexington's most promising business leaders here. What can we do for you to help us leverage that public-private partnership in the same way San Antonio has been able to do?
We'll call that fast pitch softball. You know, it's what's really impressive, I think, to see is the idea that everybody's working off the same strategy. And one of the observations I had the opportunity to sort of dig into the SA 2020 plan a little bit ahead of time. And there's a nuance here, but it's a pretty important one, which is the reason they're talking about having a strategic plan. And so part of that means is they've done the analysis, they've figured out what is it that's missing, how do they go from good to great, what's in between there, and then taken a hard look at what is it going to take to fill that gap. And then that's where they've talked about putting their resources. You may not have caught it yesterday, but I think the figure was thrown out that for every $12 of private investment, there's $1 of public investment to help promote the redevelopment downtown. You know, working off the same script, working off the same playbook, whether that is the businesses in this room, whether it's the LFUCG, whether it's the quasi-public agencies that are stirring the pot, it's working off the same plan, working towards the same vision, or at least a blurry version of the same vision. And I think that is really, and I realize that's kind of high level, but that's an important place to get to, is that rather than having a number of small plans that all kind of sit next to each other is to have the one plan that we're all working off of together.
Okay. Glenn?
Average, Central Bank, Winchester Market President. A clearly defined vision and process and strong partnerships are certainly two takeaways we're going to take with us from this visit. Could you give me a couple examples of a leadership role that banks and financial institutions have provided in these partnerships that you've been discussing, either through creative financing or philanthropic corporate giving and so forth?
I'll touch on maybe the philanthropic corporate giving side, and maybe Ben, you might have some ideas on the investment side. Bank of America is a really good example of a partner that we've employed to great effect through SA 2020 from the very beginning. You know, our market president, Kenny Wilson, has done an extraordinary job at being what we call a network under SA 2020, which is to bring together business community leaders that have corporations, businesses with some volume of employees that can have a meaningful impact in terms of volunteerism in a very focused way. And Bank of America kicked off with a number of other partners in October, something we call Serve SA, which was our first effort at getting San Antonians to see themselves as investors and San Antonians to focus their investments in a very targeted way to get what it is they really, really want. And Bank of America led that effort, and we had about, I don't know, just last time I checked, we had about 1,200 volunteers from businesses all over San Antonio that focused on 3 core education-related initiatives. These were companies and individuals who said, yes, last year it might have been health and fitness and family well-being and downtown and transportation that we were giving our volunteer hours to. This year, we realized that moving forward into the year 2020, what's most important to us is education, getting this 3rd grade reading thing right, getting this college preparedness thing right so that every kid who finishes high school, by the time they go to college, they're not getting kicked back from remedial work, but they're ready to perform, compete at the college level and take advantage of what the world has to offer. So Kenny and Bank of America really led that effort, where people focused on mentoring programs. They focused on what we call Financial Aid Saturdays, which was a pretty robust effort to make sure that every high school senior who wanted to had the ability to fill out their financial aid forms, which are FAFSA forms we call them here, which are very difficult to fill out for some. This is we have a large immigrant population here in San Antonio, and sometimes that is a barrier to folks. 90+% of folks who fill out a financial aid form actually enroll in college. So we had a tremendous hit rate there. I think we served a couple thousand kids there, all led by the city president of Bank of America. That's just one example of where banks are starting to play just a leadership role through networks. And then the other is banks are, I think, probably leading at a faster pace than maybe some other corporations in San Antonio at starting to have that focused conversation within their organizations. Banks are typically, for a lot of reasons, very active in the community at a civic level. But sometimes that investment can be spread very thin too. So banks in San Antonio are, I think, leading faster than most at saying, when we think about what's important to Frost Bank or Bank of America or Compass or Broadway Bank, in the year 2020, what's most important to our culture, our employees, that needs to show up in the city of San Antonio, and let's focus our volunteerism, our investment financially, our advocacy, our influence in those 1 or 2 specific areas so that we can have the most potent impact. And banks are leading in that area.
All right, thank you. Okay, last question from Robert Riggs.
Riggs at very small business. And I noticed in your organizational chart for Centro that your Chamber of Commerce wasn't in there. And I was wondering how they work with you. Based on what Richard said yesterday, they're a pretty active chamber. And the second part is you have a city-county government. Are you making any thoughts to a merged government because of the expansions that you're doing?
Well, it's no accident that Richard, the chamber president, sits on the board of directors of the Centro Partnership. And so that's, again, we've sort of reached out to institutions like that to make sure that they're certainly aware of and involved in what we're doing. And we've worked, historically, Downtown Alliance really functions more like a chamber than the other organizations. And historically, we've worked very, very closely, not only with the Greater Chamber, with the Hispanic Chamber, and the number of other chambers that we have in San Antonio. Most of them, again, are focused on a citywide basis, and so when there are initiatives that we'd like their support on, or vice versa, that say involve the center city, we do look for partnership opportunities. And streetcar is a good example. I don't know if Judge Wolf talked about the streetcar initiative, but we were very instrumental in sort of helping fund the study that looked at the streetcar, the rationale for streetcar, and reintroducing that mode of public transportation back into San Antonio, since it was historically here many years ago. But the Chamber actually did their own study, independent study, that looked at, again, the rationale for, does it make sense for us to have to, say, reintroduce that type of public transportation as a component of our overall transportation system. And so when there are pertinent issues, you know, we work very, very closely with the Chamber, but it's a 3,500 member group. It's a very, very large group, and they are focused on many large issues on a citywide basis. So it's it's a good relationship, is all I can say, and that we do work very, very closely together with them.
Okay, one final thought?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to the Chamber, the Chambers have been a great added value to our message and our cause. And particularly the Hispanic Chamber has partnered with the Office of Cultural Affairs and under the context of the creative economy, in hosting and co-sponsoring all of the economic impact studies that has come out of our office. And then they also have taken a very strong leadership role in hosting conferences that sort of add that conversation, that continued conversation about the importance of creativity and economic development.
All right, anything else from the panel?
I promise I'll be very brief. Just one thing I wanted to leave you with, just to reinforce something, and you touched on it a moment ago in your comments. Ed Whitaker, who is the retired chairman of GM, former CEO and chairman of AT&T, and a great San Antonian, he kicked off our RSA 2020 process a year and a half ago, and he said some words that really resonated with me, which were having a vision. He said strategic planning and having a vision is knowing what you want and getting there on purpose. And that's really key. It's very easy to turn tools into goals if you're not careful. And when you think about a specific strategy that 10 people may be employing in a different way, or a specific objective, if you're not careful, those things, you can get things done, but they'll never amount to what it is that you really set out to achieve in the first place. So having a unified vision, and I think you can see that San Antonio, we're going in the same direction. A lot of people are playing different roles, but we're all going in the same direction. We always make sure when we employ a new tool, a new resource, a check is written, a vote is cast, influence is exerted, we always check it against what it is we really ultimately wanted to have happen in the first place. And that's really been a good lesson for us and helped us move forward with much greater velocity.
All right, Ben?
Just real quickly, I would encourage you to go to the sa2020.org website and to look at that vision and to look at those areas. And then in our case, the downtownsA.org website, where you can see the result of that vision manifested in a strategic plan and a goal and direction for where we're going to take our downtown, our center city, in the next decade. So again, thank you all very much. I'll love to say to a group like this, welcome to downtown San Antonio.
Thank you.